this is Stephanie Benedetto Padovani with the Wild Creation Stories podcast, where we explore the nature of purpose, creation, identity, and reality through the magical lens of our stories. In today's story, you'll meet a demanding little girl and her stubborn grandfather and follow their adventures in storytelling. Now, this story does come with a warning. Please do not listen unless you like long stories with no moral fiber and a bad constitution. This is the story of the Fairy Princess and the Dragon. Once there was a little girl with shining sun-gold hair so long she could wrap it 30 times around her body. Well, her hair wasn't actually that long. It just felt that way because the little girl had a flair for the dramatic. Every day, the little girl's grandfather would tell her a bedtime story. The little girl's grandfather was very wise, very old, and very, very stubborn. He was supposed to wear glasses, but he didn't like the way they slid down his nose, so he rigged up a giant magnifying glass in a frame held together by corn syrup and horsefly wings, as a harness for the book to wear instead. He really did that. I'm not making that up. The little girl's favorite story was about a fairy princess who just happened to have shining sun-gold hair so long she could wrap it 30 times around her body, and how she met her very first dragon. The little girl loved this story so much that she asked her grandfather to tell the story of the fairy princess meeting her first dragon every single night. He refused, because that was his point of difference. He would only tell the story on the evening of the full moon when the wind was blowing from the north just so. Only the grandfather seemed to know when the wind was blowing just so. This was not nearly often enough for the little girl with shining sun-gold hair. The little girl begged and pleaded and cajoled and implored and even nagged, hard to believe, at her grandfather to tell her favorite story every single night, because that was her point of difference. One day, the grandfather had enough. Even though the moon was not full and the wind was not blowing from the north just so, he agreed to tell the story of the fairy princess and her first dragon. Would you like to hear it? It goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a fairy princess with shining sun-gold hair so long she could wrap it 30 times around her body, who woke up one morning and said, "I wonder if I could meet a dragon today." The moment she asked the question, a new possibility catapulted into her universe. Asking questions that create the impossible was just one of the fairy princess's many superpowers, but she didn't know that yet. On her way to the goldfish pond that morning, to brush and admire her shining sun-gold hair so long she could wrap it 30 times around her body, the fairy princess noticed a long shadow in the shape of a giant snake cast over the water. "You're blocking my sun," the fairy princess said without turning around. "I'm sorry, miss," a deep voice replied. "I'll be going now." The dragon launched himself high, high, high into the air and flew away. The fairy princess only had time to glimpse his glistening red scales and massive tail before he disappeared into the horizon. And that is how the fairy princess met her first dragon. The end. "No, no, no," the little girl cried. "That is not how the story ends." "Of course that's how it ends," her grandfather replied. "That's how I just ended it." "No, it's supposed to end with the fairy princess hopping on the dragon's back and taking a ride across the kingdom with her shining sun-gold hair so long she could wrap it 30 times around her body, blowing in the wind like a river of corn silk." "That's not how it ends today," her grandfather said. The little girl did not like this new ending, but it was time for bed. She refused to let her grandfather kiss her on the forehead. He chuckled as he left. The next night, the little girl demanded that he tell the right ending to the story of how the fairy princess met her first dragon. Her grandfather agreed, only this time he told the story of a dragonfly that lit on the fairy princess's shoulder, bit her ear, and gave her an infection that made all her shining sun-gold hair so long she could wrap it 30 times around her body fall out. The little girl was livid. That means she was really, really mad. "Tell me the story of how the fairy princess met her first dragon," she insisted. The grandfather insisted back that he had told the story just as it was meant to end, this time. The little girl fumed and went to sleep. The next night and the next and the next, the little girl demanded the right telling of the story of the fairy princess. And each time the grandfather told a different version of the story. This went on for 40 nights in a row. The more exacerbated the little girl got, the more amused the grandfather became. Finally, the little girl could take it no more. "Why won't you tell me the real story of the fairy princess and her first dragon, Poppy?" Her eyes filled with tears. The grandfather looked at her with a sly smile. "Every story is just as real as the next, little one. What if you could enjoy the story for what it is, instead of throwing a fit because it doesn't end the way you think it should?" The little girl blinked. She'd never considered enjoying the story without knowing how it was going to end. That actually might be kind of fun. So the little girl agreed to listen to the story of the fairy princess and her first dragon the way it was that night. The grandfather told the story. This time, the dragon kidnapped the fairy princess and took her to the underworld, where she was rescued by a chartreuse penguin named Felix. The little girl gasped and laughed and clapped with delight. From that night on, the little girl and the grandfather enjoyed each other a whole lot more. The grandfather even let the little girl make up her own ending to the story sometimes, even when she told it upside down and inside out in a way that made the 3 remaining hairs on his bald head curl. Because they know the secret. All stories can be fun if you listen with your heart wide open and a willingness to enjoy the ride. Hey, lovely, and thanks so much for joining me today. If you'd like to receive a weekly Wild Creation email from me filled with more inspiring stories, marketing experiments, playful questions, new podcast episodes, videos, and freebies, and anything else I happen to be playing with, go to theawakenedbusiness.com/wild creation. Until next time, may you know yourself as the gorgeous wild creation that you are.